evening, I'm Laura Lee.
And I'm Dan Wolf. Thanks for joining us. It is the fourth and final night of the Republican National Convention.
All week has been leading up to tonight when former President Donald Trump is expected to accept the GOP presidential nomination just days after surviving an assassination attempt. Now, the momentum with his campaign growing as Trump touts "Make America Safe Again" as his vision for another term in office.
While one presidential nomination will be official tonight, the other is increasingly in doubt, forcing down ballot politicians to look at how President Biden's candidacy could impact their own campaigns. Northern News Now's Madison Green spoke to current Minnesota 8th Congressional Representative Republican Pete Stauber and Democratic challenger Jen Schultz today. Both face primary challengers this August. Schultz is going up against Warba hobby farmer John Munter in August, who received 14% of the vote in 2022's primary. Stauber is facing Harry Welty again, a former Duluth school board member who got 9% of the vote 2 years ago. Stauber ultimately beat Schultz with 57% of the vote. Political experts believe voters will be familiar with the names on the ballot this November. Tonight, a look at the potential 8th district rematch and the very different levels of enthusiasm the two candidates have for their party's presidential hopefuls.
A tale of two campaign trails.
It's electric. What's happening here in Milwaukee, the energy, we are a united Republican Party.
Minnesota 8th Congressional District Representative Pete Stauber, who was at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, is rallying behind former President Donald Trump to accept the party's nomination. Meanwhile, Democratic candidate Jen Schultz, who is expected to face Stauber again this November, said she is backing President Biden simply because he is a Democrat.
You know, things are possibly may change at the convention, but right now he's the nominee. He is not stepping back. I'm supporting any Democrat that's running because it aligns with my values.
Schultz is not concerned with the name at the top of the ballot or her outward support for Biden and believes it won't have any downward impact on her own campaign.
I'm campaigning to help people and solve problems, and regardless of what happens at the top of the ticket, I think it's really important that we flip the U.S. House so we have a check on power.
Stauber believes taking a total ticket approach to winning in November will help Republicans maintain control.
President Trump on the top of the ticket is going to help every Republican across this nation, because the American people, they're well educated. The voters are well educated.
Come November, voters will make a choice again to give the incumbent a chance to serve a third consecutive term or turn to a newer and bluer representative for Minnesota's 8th Congressional District. In Duluth, Madison Green, Northern News Now.
Again, live coverage of the RNC kicks off tonight at 8 o'clock right here on Northern News Now. Again, President Trump is set to accept his nomination. We'll have a full recap tonight at 10 o'clock.